Minister, I just wanted to go back to a little bit around human resources and some of the things we're talking about. So one of the things I wanted to ask were how many human resource complaints were lodged in your department in 2017? Do you have a number for that?
I don't know that I have a number on specific human resources complaints, and I'm going to seek from my officials whether or not that's even something that we can are we allowed to even say. I know there were a number of grievances filed through AUPE in terms of workload grievances having to do with court clerks, which is why we've taking the step of filling those vacancies and adding some new positions. But in terms of the total department, I will seek some advice on whether we're allowed to disclose that number, and I will get back to you.
Right. Yeah. No. It's just again in the interest of the capable people that are doing the work in Alberta Justice. The conversation that's out there that's taking up to 7 or 8 months from when a complaint is lodged to even when the complainant is even interviewed. And do you have an average time from when a complaint is lodged to its conclusion? Do you have a number for that?
I don't think we keep averages on that because each case is so individualized. It's sort of a difficult thing to average. I do know, like I've said, we've had some problems with some workplace grievances. I can't speak specifically to the ones that you raise. Most of them will go sort of by way of, so usually all our employees who are represented under the collective agreement, which is a fairly large proportion of those employees, those complaints will go by way of a process which is outlined in the collective agreement. I'm not sure exactly what the steps are, but there's usually a series of steps that have to be gone through in a specific order, and they usually have timelines around them. Right. So I don't know what those are for our specific collective agreements or whether I can disclose them, but I can definitely look into them.
So is the process the same for lodging a complaint from somebody who's unionized and somebody who's management exempt?
I would imagine that it isn't, but I don't know. Yeah, it's not quite the same because the union will have bargained for a certain process, okay, whereas the process for exempt employees will be the process that we have delineated.
Right. And you can understand why I'm asking these questions. It's just obviously if there's a delay in court time and we have a workforce, whether they're management exempt or unionized, if there's nobody there to fill those positions and we're shutting down court time, obviously that's an issue. Is that actually happening where they and or how much overtime is being run that affects the budget where that money could be put back into other areas of justice that create efficiencies?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question. We have been working on this with respect to corrections since I took office. So when I initially came into this ministry, one of our biggest problems with cost overruns in corrections was the fact that we had huge amounts of overtime because there hadn't been hiring done in quite a long time. So you're absolutely right. That was super inefficient and it was extremely hard on our employees. So we've been working to rectify that in that area for quite a while. We do know we've been having some issues with respect to our frontline clerks in court areas, and that, that sort of constraint can have serious impacts on folks, and that ultimately it has a more negative impact down the line, and that's why we're looking to invest money to fill up those positions. And I think hiring has been underway for some time for those. We've also added a few additional clerk positions to deal with bail because we've been having some troubles in that area. But you're absolutely right; those are certainly concerns, and we're definitely alive to them. And I think we have in corrections, which was our biggest problem with that problem, I think we've managed to push that back to a certain degree. Obviously, I mean, you'll know we're a first responder as well, so you know that sometimes there's nothing that can be done. It's just the situation, but for the most part, we try to keep that overtime down as much as possible because it's better for everyone. Right.
Now, just again, relating to prosecutors, especially in central Alberta, is there a record keeping of how many of them are off on sick leave and or mental stress leave because their caseloads are so high? Do you keep record of that?
There will be records within the department. I don't think, because there are only a certain number of prosecutors in every office, and when you get down to a very specific level, essentially we'd be disclosing personal information about individuals if we were to tell you who's there and who isn't.
Right.
We do know that there's a concern with prosecutors working hard. That's why we invested in the last budget and then again in this budget in additional prosecution resources.
Okay.
And so we're trying to make sure we balance the need to not grow the size of the public service against the need to ensure that people are not being overworked, and that can be a difficult balance to strike, but I think we're getting closer.
Right, thank you for that. I just want to follow up on Indigenous issues. Yesterday I asked the question, or not yesterday, the day before, the $2 million in 2015 to consolidate data about missing and murdered Indigenous women across different police services. Were you able to find out where that report is at yet?
We may have been. Apparently we're in phase. So it appears that we're into the phase 2 now. So the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Initiative included an environmental scan of all police services to better understand their similarities. A final report and video were created, and it was distributed to communities. So that's already, but it looks like there's a second phase underway as well.
Okay.
I'll provide you
and if you could just let us know where to find those reports,
it's probably
that
a
would be
better
great.
way to go with that.
So how's the current budget supporting the principles of restorative justice right now?
So we do have some restorative justice grants that come through. We are looking at that, so there's some that come through the Victims of Crime Fund as well. And so we are looking at sort of trying to expand that program and working with partners to expand that program. We're hoping to have more to say about that soon. But you're right, restorative justice has been demonstrated. I mean, it does require, in the criminal system, it requires that all participants be willing to participate. Like, they have to voluntarily enter, both the complainant
Right.
and the accused. But it can have some very beneficial outcomes, and it results in higher satisfaction. So we're definitely looking very closely at ways to expand that.
Great. So does your department have any specific goals in regards to the respect of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission or the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples? How does that work into your department, and what kind of goals are you focused on?
So that impacts my department in a huge number of ways. Indigenous individuals are not only more likely to be incarcerated, they're also more likely to be the victims of crime. So I think justice needs to take a very hard look at that. So one of them certainly is we've been working on our Gladue reports, and we've gotten our numbers, I think they're up to 91% now, are produced within the 6 weeks that the court requires, and that's enables the court to take the circumstances of the Indigenous offender into account. And so I think that's a very good way to move forward. We're also working with many of our partners. So one of the ways to ensure that you're not seeing overrepresentation of certain groups is to make sure that you're sort of focused on how it is that those individuals are coming into the system. We do know that we had in remand a lot of short stay individuals, and I think even those individuals were disproportionately Indigenous people. So we do need to look at how and why it is that's happening. And you know, when you have someone who's staying in remand for only 1 to 4 days, that person obviously isn't presenting a danger to the public. They didn't need to be in jail. It's just somehow the system has wrongly categorized them. And so we're working on ways to ensure that we're not sort of asking for low cash bails or other reasons that those people are getting into the system. So that's certainly one of them. But I could go on about this all day. Did you
Okay,
want me
no,
to?
I just, well, so again, how does the budget, you know, how does your budget address those responsibilities? And again, all right, very good.
Thank you.